their labs around the University of Southampton, started talking to the archaeologists there. And one of the very interesting things that came out of this was the kind of almost obsessiveness that archaeologists have with labelling things. So they might create a label for a find, they might then write on the artefact, put it in a bag with another label, then put the label in the bag and perhaps add another label on top. So you end up with artefacts labelled about 5 or 6 times. So we were wondering whether this kind of very obsessive behaviour might be a link into kind of thinking about new technologies and linking, and so that's where our kind of note-taking systems come from, in that we're attempting to link the notes that archaeologists take with the labels and IDs associated with artefacts. As I said, this is a work in progress. Hopefully I'll be able to explain that a bit later. So another thing I've been doing is I went out and did some field work at a site that the university digs at quite often, which is Portus. This was a very massive site. It was the imperial port for Rome. So they've been there for about 10 years. It's a very established excavation. So one of my interesting findings was in terms of how evident the hierarchies are when you're working on an archaeological site. So on the left you see an archaeologist who has quite a bit of experience, prior experience in archaeology. He was a very confident archaeologist. And he basically worked in this trench alone for about 2 weeks. He'd been working there so long that it had been called his trench. He had very little supervision from the supervisors. He worked really autonomously. On the other hand, the girl on the right had turned up at the site hoping to get some more archaeological experience. She had very little and was quite unconfident. And as a result of this, she spent the majority of her time cleaning rather than excavating. So you see the brush in her hand, she was literally just brushing the soil, which is a very boring job. She wasn't very happy about it. But it was really apparent to me how much the hierarchy and experience manifested itself by being there. And this has kind of driven where I'm taking technology from this point. So another thing that I noticed was in terms of conversation. So you really noticed that conversation varied based on kind of the locations people were within the environment. So for example, while people were digging, they were having very kind of trivial conversations. They weren't particularly about the archaeology, more about kind of other things. But when people wanted to discuss, make an interpretation or discuss the archaeology, they would either stand up away from it or more often than not, get up on the edges of the trenches and then start to look in whilst they were debating what was going on or thinking about what they would do next in the trench. So I found this really interesting, this kind of patterns of behaviour. And this has inspired some further kind of studies that I will tell you about in a second. So here's some more examples of that. So this was a diagram I made over an hour. It just shows a supervisor moving around the edges of the trench, never actually entering the trench to be able to discuss things with the archaeologists that were staying on the edges. And this is quite a typical scene, people discussing things at the edge of a trench or the side of a trench. So yeah, as a response to this, I developed this thing called the ball study that I'm in the process of experimenting with. So I conceive it as an augmented reality breaching experiment. Although it's a very, very low-tech way of doing things, basically it's augmented reality because we're placing markers within an environment that everyone else can see. It's a breaching experiment in that it's raising archaeologists' awareness to behaviours that they're perhaps not thinking about prior to me making them aware of them. And it's examining how this kind of awareness might alter their behaviour in the environment. So it's a very simple study. It works like this. An archaeologist approaches the side of the trench. They spend any time there either talking to the archaeologists or looking in. We mark their location with a small plastic ball. Over time, lots of balls appear around the edges of the trench, and this either raises the archaeologist's kind of awareness to their behaviour. Either they come over to the trench and start discussing what the balls are about. People are obviously standing here discussing something, I want to see what it is, or it puts them off going to the trench because they see all the balls and they think these archaeologists have been standing around doing nothing all day, I'm not going to go over and be another one. So I conducted this study at a field school run by the University of Southampton. What was very interesting about this was after kind of about an hour of placing balls around, you could see that the supervisors were the ones that were being frequently marked, and the students very rarely got out on the edges of the trenches. And so I think a field school was probably quite an inappropriate environment to be doing this experiment on, because the students felt that if they got out of the trenches, they would probably be told off by the supervisor, and they felt that they shouldn't be engaging in this kind of behaviour, which is about observing the archaeology. So I'm planning to do this experiment now in more relaxed environments like citizen research like amateur archaeology and perhaps kind of commercial environments as well. But what is interesting is how much this shows the hierarchy again in archaeology, how much is manifested through the kind of ways that archaeological activities are organised. So one final bit of research that I did was I nipped out to Pompeii, which is very interesting in terms of archaeological technology because it's one of the most advanced sites in terms of the technology that's being used. They use iPads for nearly all their site recording. And there was some interesting, so one of the findings was that the iPads are really benefiting the archaeologists and they really enjoy using them, particularly in being able to access information right where they are on the spot, having access to everyone else's information, which is helping them create interpretations because they can pull up what the person did the day before or the person was doing next to them a few hours ago. So having access to information is brilliant. But there's some more kind of different effects that you wouldn't expect from having technology in this environment that I think are really worth exploring. So one of them is what the archaeologists described as an intangible benefit of communication. They felt that they were having greater amounts of conversation and the quality of conversation had gone up, but they couldn't really pin what it was that was doing it from having the iPads on site. Similarly, the archaeologists felt that they had greater responsibility on the site, so they felt empowered by having these objects because they had less need to go talk to their supervisors because they had all the information in front of them. So these are two themes that I want to take forward with my own research and explore within introducing technologies into a space. So I think I've pretty much said all that. Yeah.